Sergeant, you want some of this new Cool Whip topping?
Later, Pyle. I'm getting in shape in case our Cool Whip contest winner's a girl. Anybody can win a trip to Hollywood and a guest appearance on the show.
For millions of Americans in the 1960s, the sound of a good-natured Shazam, followed by a vein-popping Pyle, was a weekly ritual. Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., wasn't just a TV show, it was a slice of comfort food, a comedy that pitted the bumbling innocence of Private Gomer Pyle against the volcanic temper of his drill instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter. The chemistry between Jim Nabors and Frank Sutton was electric, a perfectly timed dance of absurdity and frustration that became one of the most beloved dynamics in television history. For 5 seasons, the show was a ratings titan, all built on the hilarious and seemingly effortless conflict between the two leads, but what if that conflict wasn't what it seemed? For decades, rumors have circulated hinting at a quiet friction on set, of clashing work ethics and unspoken tension. The story remained a footnote in the legacy of a classic sitcom. But a careful look at forgotten interviews and insider accounts reveals the truth of Frank Sutton's experience. This isn't just the story of a beloved show. It's the story of a man at war with his own image, a serious actor in a comedic goldmine, and the quiet burden he carried long after the cameras stopped rolling. This is what Frank Sutton finally revealed about the tensions on the set of Gomer Pyle, and the real struggle was not with his co-star, but with himself, long before he ever put on a drill instructor's uniform and unleashed the most famous scowl on television. Frank Spencer Sutton was a world away from Hollywood. He was a man shaped not by comedy, but by classical theater and the stark realities of war. To understand the complex man who would become Sergeant Carter, you have to understand the intellectual, patriotic, and intensely private person he was from the start. Born in Clarksville, Tennessee, on October 23, 1923, Frank's passion for acting sparked early. A standout childhood memory involves his parents giving him grease paint. He promptly painted his face and put on a show, declaring he was going to be an actor. While charming, his family couldn't have known how real that claim was. That theatrical instinct was paired with a formidable intellect. Frank was an avid reader and a true intellectual who frequented the local library. This wasn't a phase, it was a lifelong passion. As an adult, his home housed a personal library of hundreds of books, a testament to his love of learning. This image of a quiet, scholarly man devouring literature stands in stark contrast to the loud, perpetually exasperated sergeant he would later embody. After graduating from East High School in Nashville in 1941, where he thrived in the drama department, his calling was clear. Sutton later said, "The first time I walked out on the stage, I had a warm feeling. I knew then I wanted to be an actor." He returned to Clarksville and began working as a radio announcer, honing the powerful voice that would one day echo across the country. With the outbreak of World War II, Frank felt the call of duty. In a move full of irony, he tried to enlist in the U.S. Marine Corps but was medically rejected for color blindness. The man who would become pop culture's most famous Marine was turned away by the Corps. Undeterred, he joined the U.S. Army and served with distinction. This was no desk job. Sergeant Frank Sutton participated in an astonishing 14 assault landings in the Asiatic-Pacific Theater. For his service, he was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart, medals that spoke to a bravery he rarely discussed. Honorably discharged in 1946, Sutton enrolled at Columbia University to formally study drama, graduating cum laude in 1952. It was there he met his wife, Toby Igler, a soap opera writer. She recalled, "The first time I saw him he was reading a monologue from Hamlet. I never expected to be so impressed by a young actor." They married in 1949, building a partnership that would ground him throughout his career. Throughout the 1950s, Sutton built a resume filled with serious, dramatic work on shows like The Twilight Zone - Naked City - and Gunsmoke, and had a key role in the Oscar-winning film Marty. This was the career he was building, a respected character actor known for his depth and range. He was a scholar, a decorated war hero, and a classically trained thespian. He was everything Sergeant Vince Carter was not. And that conflict would come to define his life. By the early 1960s, The Andy Griffith Show was a television institution. Producer Sheldon Leonard had a gift for spotting talent, which led to the creation of one of the most successful sitcoms of the decade. The character of Gomer Pyle was based on an incompetent gas station attendant and was intended for a single episode. Andy Griffith himself discovered Jim Nabors, a young performer with a rich singing voice, and his golly shtick was a perfect fit. That one episode changed everything. Audiences adored Gomer. His guileless nature was the perfect foil for Sheriff Andy and Deputy Barney Fife. The response was so overwhelming that CBS saw a golden opportunity, a spin-off. The concept was a classic fish-out-of-water story. What happens when this gentle soul joins the U.S. Marine Corps? The pilot episode, filmed as the season 4 finale of The Andy Griffith Show, was a hit. But for the new show to work, Gomer needed his own foil. He needed a Sergeant Carter. The casting of Gunnery Sergeant Vince Carter was a stroke of genius. The show needed an actor who could embody everything Gomer was not: disciplined, cynical, and with a temper that could go from 0 to 100 in seconds. At first glance, Frank Sutton seemed an odd choice. He was a dramatic actor who preferred Shakespeare to slapstick. But the producers saw his intensity. They realized his disciplined, professional approach would be the perfect anchor for Nabors' more whimsical style. The comedy wouldn't come from Sergeant Carter trying to be funny, it would come from him trying, and failing, to maintain his sanity in the face of Private Pyle's relentless incompetence. Sutton's real-life Army background added a layer of authenticity. He understood the discipline, the structure, and the mindset of military life. This foundation of realism made his comedic outbursts all the more hilarious. When Sutton and Nabors first appeared on screen together, the chemistry was immediate. It was the perfect comedic collision. Nabors' gentle demeanor was the immovable object, and Sutton's explosive energy was the unstoppable force. The contrast in their personalities, which would later be a source of internal struggle for Sutton, was the very engine of their success. The network knew they had a hit, and Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., was fast-tracked for the fall of 1964. Frank Sutton, the serious thespian and decorated war veteran, had landed the role that would make him a household name. It would bring him fame and fortune, but it would also become the identity he would spend the rest of his career trying to move beyond. When Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., premiered in the fall of 1964, it was a runaway hit, consistently ranking in the top 10 for its entire 5-season run. At a time when the nation was grappling with the war in Vietnam, this light-hearted take on military life became a source of weekly comfort. The heart of this success was the brilliant dynamic between Gomer Pyle and Sergeant Carter. Their relationship was a masterclass in comedy. Gomer, played with unwavering sweetness by Jim Nabors, operated on a different plane of existence. His world was one of absolute literalism and unshakable optimism. This innocence was the ultimate weapon against Sergeant Carter's authority. How do you punish a man who doesn't understand he's being punished? This disconnect drove the comedy. Frank Sutton's performance was the critical anchor. He never played Carter as a one-dimensional villain. Instead, he layered the character with human frailty. Carter's rage was born of profound exasperation. Sutton's genius was in his reactions, the slow burn, the twitch of his eye, the clenching of his jaw before the inevitable explosion. He was a man pushed to the brink of sanity, and his descent was hilarious. Beneath the shouting, Sutton allowed glimpses of a begrudging, almost paternal affection for Pyle to show through. He would often find himself protecting Gomer from others or from the consequences of his own actions. These moments were key to the show's appeal. Carter might scream at Pyle, but he would never let anyone else truly harm him. There was a sense that Gomer was his idiot, and he had a strange, protective ownership. This dynamic added a surprising amount of heart. The show's simple formula was its strength. Each week, Gomer would stumble into a new predicament, and Sergeant Carter would be dragged into the chaos, his attempts to assert control only making things worse. The episode would climax with Carter, red-faced and defeated, watching as Gomer somehow, through sheer luck, emerged unscathed. This on-screen phenomenon cemented Frank Sutton in the American cultural landscape. The partnership with neighbors was so perfect that audiences assumed they must have been close friends off-camera. But behind the scenes, the very differences that created their comedic sparks were also the source of a quiet, internal struggle for one of the men. While audiences roared with laughter, a much quieter drama was unfolding for Frank Sutton. The success of the show brought a grueling work schedule and the repetitive nature of sitcom production. For a man of Sutton's temperament and background, these elements began to wear on him, creating a tension that was less about a feud and more about a fundamental clash of philosophies. Sutton was the consummate professional, a product of the disciplined world of theater. He was meticulous, precise, and deeply serious about his craft. He arrived on set fully prepared, knew his lines and everyone else's, and expected every scene to be executed with precision. He viewed acting as a serious art form, even within a sitcom. Jim Nabors, on the other hand, had a far more relaxed, easygoing approach, rooted in his own gentle demeanor. This contrast, so effective on camera, created a challenging work environment for a perfectionist like Sutton. He was an intelligent, well-read man who had studied at Columbia University. Now, his professional life revolved around reacting to Gomer accidentally painting a general's car or adopting a platoon of ducks. The repetition of the format, the same setups, the same reactions week after week, began to feel like an artistic prison. The role that made him a star was also boxing him in. He was also a deeply private man who preferred the company of his family and his books to the Hollywood party scene. This reserved nature was often misinterpreted as aloofness. The truth was, he was there to do a job, do it well, and go home. The idea of a bitter feud with neighbors is largely a myth. In fact, after Gomer Pyle ended, Sutton became a regular performer on the Jim Nabors Hour, appearing in comedy sketches. Their relationship was that of professional colleagues with different working styles, not bitter rivals. The real pressure Sutton felt was internal. The anger and exasperation that made Sergeant Carter so funny were an echo of the real, albeit more controlled, frustration the actor was experiencing as an artist. For years after Gomer Pyle ended, Frank Sutton maintained a dignified silence about the role that had defined him. But in a few rare interviews from the early 1970s, he finally let his guard down. What he revealed was something far more complex and poignant than a simple backstage feud. The tension, he clarified, was a battle that raged within himself. He was grateful for the fame, but also deeply frustrated by the artistic box it put him in. In a 1969 interview, he spoke about his career before the show. Until 5 years ago, the closest I came to comedy was being strapped into an electric chair as a convicted killer or being shot by the FBI, he said. You might say now I am a killer turned comedian. He found it ironic to be an actor who yearned for dramatic roles, only to become a comic. This was the heart of his struggle, the constant conflict between his dedication to serious acting and the demands of a hugely popular, but creatively limiting, sitcom. He felt a desperate need to prove his range and be seen as more than a red-faced caricature. He even expressed embarrassment about his intellectual pursuits, feeling they clashed with his public image. After all, I'm recognized as a song and dance comic or as Jim Straight Man, he said, revealing a deep-seated insecurity about how the world perceived him. Sutton argued that his love of learning was essential to his abilities as a performer. Exercising my mind through in-depth exploration of various art forms strengthens me as a performer, he explained, gives me more to work with and makes my characterizations more interesting to the audience. This was the serious artist talking, the man who saw every role as a chance to bring nuance to the screen, yet was trapped in a role that rarely demanded more than a predictable explosion. His quiet nature only intensified this internal struggle. While Hollywood partied, Sutton read. He once lamented how people expected him to be aggressive off-screen, when in reality he was a thoughtful, reserved man who hated being shoved into a stereotype. When Gomer Pyle ended in 1969, Sutton was ready to move on. He had spent 5 years in the uniform and was desperate for his artistic freedom back. In finally breaking his silence, Frank Sutton wasn't settling scores. He was reclaiming his own narrative, revealing that the true conflict on the set of Gomer Pyle was the quiet, lonely battle of a serious artist struggling to be seen from behind the mask of his most famous creation. Frank Sutton's commitment to his craft and his intensely private nature extended to his health. The man who played the tough-as-nails Sergeant Carter seemed to have internalized that persona, reluctant to admit weakness or vulnerability, even to himself. Off-screen, Sutton was the antithesis of Sergeant Carter. He was a devoted husband to his wife, Toby, and a loving father to their 2 children, Joe and Amanda. He found his joy not in the Hollywood spotlight, but in the quiet of his home, surrounded by his books and his loved ones. This division between his public and private selves was a deliberate choice, a way to protect what was most precious to him. After Gomer Pyle ended, Sutton threw himself back into the theater, his first love. He worked a grueling schedule, performing in dinner theaters across the country. It was this demanding work that led to his tragic end. Sudden end. On the evening of June 28, 1974, Sutton was in Shreveport, Louisiana, preparing for a performance of the play Love at the Beverly Barn Dinner Playhouse. Backstage in his dressing room, moments before the curtain was set to rise, Frank Sutton collapsed. He had suffered a massive, fatal heart attack. He was only 50 years old. The audience, waiting for a night of comedy, was instead met with the shocking news. In retrospect, the warning signs had been there. For years, Sutton had reportedly suffered from symptoms of serious heart trouble, but he brushed them off. It's been suggested he feared that admitting any physical weakness would undermine the tough guy image that provided for his family but also confined him as an artist. That silence proved to be a fatal decision. Frank Sutton was buried in Greenwood Cemetery in his hometown of Clarksville, Tennessee. There, he is honored as a hometown hero with a life-size statue. But in Hollywood, his story serves as a poignant reminder of the personal toll of fame and the quiet struggles that can hide behind the brightest of spotlights. He was an actor who yearned for artistic respect but was forever beloved for a comedic role, and a private man whose face became a public icon. The story of the tensions on the set of Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., is not the tale of a bitter feud that Hollywood whispers have suggested. It is something far more human. The conflict was not born of animosity between Frank Sutton and Jim Nabors, but from a collision of worlds within one man. It was the clash between Frank Sutton, the disciplined, classical actor, and Sergeant Carter, the loud but wildly popular sitcom character. Sutton's silence was never about hiding a backstage rivalry. It was about grappling with the profound frustration of being celebrated for the very thing that limited him. He respected his co-star, and they continued to work together after the show ended. The pressure he felt was not from a fellow actor, but from the weight of an image he could never fully escape. His life was a study in contrasts, a decorated combat veteran who was rejected by the Marines he would later personify, a quiet scholar famous for playing a bellowing sergeant, a man who cherished his privacy, yet whose face became one of the most recognizable in 1960s America. He was a master of his craft, capable of channeling his internal frustrations into a comedic performance for the ages, all while keeping his deepest struggles hidden from view. The Real Story is a poignant look at the cost of fame and the often lonely journey of an artist, revealing that behind the laughter, there was a man of great depth who carried a burden his millions of fans never saw.